Namaste nerds, this is Navinad with another budget pub stomper deck tech. Today we're going to be doing $100 Urza. What I'd recommend, by the way, since Urza just keeps getting more and more expensive, is if you're going to be getting into this deck, try to buy Urza sooner than later. The pieces keep going up, Urza itself keeps going up, so I did allow a little bit of a buffer in here, but I would buy this up if you want to play Urza. So there are a lot of different ways to take this deck, right? Even in CDH at the highest levels, there's different ways to build Urza. And there's, I think, a lot of viable ways that you could choose to build Urza even at the $100 build. You could go for like a more Staxy version, but you have to allocate a lot of your budget to cards. Like, I mean, Winter Orb was in this deck, but like I said, the deck just keeps getting more expensive even over the last few weeks, so I ended up cutting it. But you can do Staxy, you can do Storage Matrix and some of the other Stax pieces, and try to kind of drag people into the long game and make them play a long game with you. And you're the control deck, you try to turn the corner, establish some kind of a card draw engine, and win the game in the late game. Or you can go like Super Turbo, Infinite Mana deck, where you just try to combo off as fast as possible. One way to build the deck, and this is a fairly popular way even in CEDH, is to cut all of the creatures except Hullbreaker Horror and or Tide Spout Tyrant, and just use polymorph effects and have like 4 ways to just, well, you've got the Hullbreaker Horror, Tide Spout, and 2 polymorphs at least, that all become basically 1-card win conditions inside your Urza Lord High Artificer deck. So you could do it that way. What I've decided to do is take kind of the middle ground here. And I actually think that's a good thing for anybody who's not played Urza to start off that way. But I even think it might be the best way at $100. But for sure it would be the best way to start, because you'll get a look at all the different things inside the deck and all the stuff Urza does and how you can break it and what fits your play style and your meta the best. And so speaking of what Urza does, what does Urza does? So Urza, when he enters the battlefield, creates a 0/0, we call them constructs colloquially, most of the time. It creates a construct. That's basically just an artifact creature that has power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts you control, including it. Maybe more important, Urza allows you to tap an untapped artifact you control for a blue mana. So all of your artifacts become mana rocks. That's a mana engine. So you've got a mana engine in the command zone, and you've got an infinite mana outlet. This 5 mana ability, shuffle your library, exile the top card. Until end of turn, you can play that card without paying its mana cost. You might activate that occasionally. I wouldn't look at that as like a card draw value engine. It's really just an infinite mana outlet. I mean, you'll use it when you're desperate, but generally, if you're using that 5 mana ability just kind of as you're playing the game, something isn't going your way, right? We don't want to use it, but it's there for you in a pinch. More or less what we're going to use this for is a mana engine that breaks parity on Stax pieces while being a combo piece and an infinite mana outlet. So it just does all the things. If you're familiar with my videos at all, you may know about my little checklist, and it kind of checks all the boxes. It's just a very good commander, especially on a budget. Urza's busted, and I'm going to teach you how to really make Urza the bustedest that you can make it on $100, in my opinion. So the way we decided to go here, like I said, is kind of middle of the road. We are loading a ton of instants. Our deck is not likely, well, if you're playing in a budget CDH, like a competitive $100 comp kind of meta, which you may or may not be, but if you are, there might be faster decks. Definitely you can build a faster deck for $100. This isn't quite like Marwyn fast, but it's up there. It can go pretty quick. And the way I built the deck is I loaded it full of interaction. We have 26 instants. We've got lots of ways to try to slow down the deck that might be a little bit faster than you. and then try to establish some kind of an engine. If you get your mana engine online, which, you know, most of the time in budget competitive, mana is the bottleneck. Urza will solve that problem. Once Urza is in play, mana is no longer your bottleneck. You've got all the mana in the world, and you're looking for a card draw engine. Once you get one of your card draw engines or quasi card draw engines in play, like the reality chip just lets you play cards off the top of your deck, busted, just exactly what Urza needed. Forensic Gadgeteer might be the best thing that's happened to the budget version of Urza ever, like since inception. This card is so good with this deck, and it's $1.70. If you're running Urza, if you're not doing the polymorph stuff, this should probably be even in your CDH deck. It reduces the activated costs of artifacts by 1, which includes the clue tokens that it makes. So whenever you cast an artifact, which is going to be all the time, you make a clue. But now your clues tap for mana because you've got Urza, and because of Forensic Gadgeteer, you can tap one clue to crack another one because they only cost 1 to crack. So it's a value engine, it makes mana, and it makes cards, and it's a combo piece. So I think we're going to look at these value engines. These are going to be kind of one of the things you're really looking for in the game so that you can get to the late game, turn the corner, take control. It's going to be Forensic Gadgeteer, the reality chip. Those are probably the 2 best. And you've got some decent card draw options. Recurring Insight's fantastic. In fact, it was in my full power CDH deck, Malcolm Kedis, for a long time. I did eventually cut it. Paradoxical Outcome, holy cow. In gold fishing, I wasn't sure what to think about this, but I thought I'd give it a shot. In gold fishing, you know, you get to a spot where you've got like 5 artifacts in play on turn 6 or something, and you've got like 3 0-drops and 3 1-drops. You can tap them all for mana, cast your Paradoxical Outcome, bounce them all to your hand, draw 5, 6 cards, cast all the artifacts again, tap them for mana again. It ends up being card draw. It's like a ritual that draws cards at the same time. It's like a really busted card in exactly this deck. We've got all the best interaction pieces we could use for budget. I would say Swan Song maybe should be in here, but it's getting a little expensive. I had to cut it in one of my last rounds of cuts. But not only is it one of the best interaction pieces, but it's also going to help you win the game in this particular deck, which we'll get to momentarily. So we've got the tutors, the card draw. The other engines are not quite as good. Like the 2 engines we talked about first are the best engines, but you've also got Eye of Vecna, which this should probably be in your Urza deck, maybe even your CD. Like this is pretty good. I mean, at the bottom, at the very base level floor, it's a 2-mana rock when you've got Urza out that draws a card on ETB. But you can also draw an extra card with it every turn, and it's going to tap for mana to help you do that. And Collector's Vault, which I wouldn't play anywhere but Urza. But I think this is good. I think this is good in here. It's going to start making treasures. And remember, in this deck, treasures are actually more like Mox Sapphires. So it's going to start pumping out Mox Sapphires that are pretty quickly going to kind of snowball and give you the mana required to tap it, to activate it, to make more. So it's going to help you loot through your deck. It's kind of like a Ledger Shredder kind of a card. That also just, I mean, look, when you're playing Urza, 1 and 2 and 0 mana artifacts have a really low bar to clear in terms of how powerful they are in order to make it into the deck. The only reason there's any bar at all is because there's lots to choose from. So we're going to put all these hate pieces in. We've got Soul Guide Lantern to hate on graveyards, Tormod's Crypt, same thing. Pithing Needle's great if you happen to be in a pod where there's 2 players playing the same commander. This can shut them both off. You can turn off really anything. And again, at floor, it's just a 1-mana, tap it for 1. Grafdigger's Cage, if you run into Kinnan or Winota, they can't play cards, they can't cheat shit into play. Then we've got Welding Jar, which protects our stuff and is a Mox Sapphire. As far as other draw, we've got the Midnight Clock. That's not in here for card draw, and it's not in here for just to be a mana rock. I mean, it's fine as a card draw piece. You can pump a lot of mana and probably get this thing to trigger pretty consistently. What we really want this for is we're going to do twister loops with it, right? So if you're looking through the deck, as a buddy of mine recently did, and this is a store owner, he texted me and said, hey, silly question, how does your deck actually win the game? And it's like, no, that's actually not a silly question. That's a really good question, because you might notice if you go through it, there aren't any win conditions. That's not by accident. I do believe, personally, if we have a commander that's going to be a mana engine, well, I should say, if we have a commander that is an infinite mana outlet, then we're going to be doing infinite mana things in the deck. We're going to be able to draw our deck. We don't need a win con. Like, if you build a deck with even just a little bit of foresight, you can make sure that, given infinite mana and access to all of the cards in your entire deck, remember, when you use Urza's ability, you make infinite mana with the 99, you use Urza's ability, you can exile as many pieces as you want, you can cast them in any order. So essentially what that means is you've got access to whatever cards you want in whatever order you want them. You don't need dedicated win conditions that are kind of dead otherwise. The closest thing to a dead card I've got in the deck is going to be like Rings of Brighthearth, which still can do some things. You know, sometimes when you play your Isochron Scepter, you'll just put a counter spell on it, or a cantrip, or a bounce spell, and being able to copy that effect with Isochron Scepter. I mean, it's not great, but it's not nothing. It's not dead. Rings has some text. Oh, you can get double Eye of Vecna triggers off of it. It does some stuff. Not a lot. Not a lot. Occasionally, I guess you might double your Urza, your 5-mana Urza ability with it. But that's about as close to a dead card as you're going to find in the deck. And the reason I did want this is a combo piece that is exactly a 3-mana artifact. So I'm going to cut it a little bit of slack, even though it's a pretty dead card. There's a high premium on combo pieces that are artifacts that exactly cost 3 mana, because we have tutors that specifically look for 3-mana things, and we've got Trophy Mage that looks for exactly a 3-mana artifact, and then of course all of our artifact tutors will find it. So we're going to give that a pass, even though it's basically a dead card. We've got some of the interaction pieces I just want to quickly talk about before we get to the kind of important stuff, the infinite mana, how to generate infinite mana, how to win the game with infinite mana. There's some pieces that I would that you might be a little skeptical of at first. Okay, Disrupting Shoal, but that I think you should play. Disrupting Shoal, free interaction. You're in an all-blue deck most of the time in a even slightly competitive pod. Your opponents are all going to have decks that have mostly 1 and 2 drop, maybe 3 CMC cards that they're casting, and you're going to have those same kinds of cards. Most of the time, this just turns into like Force of Will. You know, like, I know it's not always going to be. Most of the time, though, this is going to be Force. I would not play the budget version of this deck without this card. Misdirection, I don't think you should be skeptical of. That's one of the best cards in the deck, maybe the best piece of interaction in the deck. You don't see a lot of Stern Scolding being played in CDH. It makes lists occasionally, but so Stern Scolding ought to be a budget staple. I think it would be a CDH staple if it weren't for the embarrassment of riches that is the blue interaction suite. This is like the 32nd best counterspell. But remember, the first 10 are super expensive, and like the next 5 are sort of expensive, and you know, it's maybe even just a little bit better in high power or budget competitive than it is in CDH, because you know, there's more, it's a more creature focused situation or environment. So there was another piece I was proud of, Machine Over Matter. This is crazy, right? Like, there's virtually no time when this isn't going to be 1 mana bounce target thing, and they have yet to print just straight up 1 mana bounce target thing at instant speed. We get to use that card, which really is like overpowered. Stubborn Denial, this is going to be fantastic in the early game, because in turns 1, 2, 3, people don't have extra mana to spend, so it's a force spike. But then in the later game, you're going to have your Urza out, and when you have Urza out, you usually have a 4/4. I mean, it's pretty hard to. This deck's not going to make a construct that is usually less than 4 power. So as long as you've got an at least 4 power Karn, Stubborn Denial is 1 mana counter target non-creature spell. Again, we don't get cards like that. That's too good, right? What don't know if everything else I think is going to be explained either in the infinite mana stuff or win conditions, or just sort of makes sense by itself. But let's, oh, did we talk about storage matrix? So this is a Stax piece that did survive my cuts because it's only $2. Urza breaks parity on effects like this that only work if they're untapped, because the way this will work is, so when your opponents go to their untap, they're going to each have to choose artifact, creature, or land and only untap those things. And that's a pain in the ass, right? But when it's our turn, we're going to use Urza to tap the storage matrix for blue mana, turning the storage matrix off. Then we're going to untap all of our things, and we're going to untap storage matrix last, so that when our opponents get to their untap, they're still having to choose what kind of thing they want to untap. It's not as good as Winter Orb. I would not fight you if you're like, dude, we have to get Winter Orb in this deck. I'd say go on, do it. Or even if you went to like $150 instead of $100, absolutely, Winter Orb is one of the best. Static Orb, Winter Orb, try to get those in your deck if you can squeeze them. But at $100, I felt like this was the list I wanted to kind of end up on. Individual card discussion before we get into infinite mana. So I wanted to talk about the individual cards that might not look obvious, and then I want to talk about the ways that we're going to create infinite mana. And finally, I want to talk about the ways to win the game with infinite mana, because it's not obvious. Again, you look through here, you don't see any win conditions, so there's some explaining to do. But we're going to do that last. First, let's talk about how we get to infinite mana. So there's a few combos that we've got plenty of tutors for. We've got lots of card draw. We're going to find our combos. We've got pieces to slow the game down, removal, a little bit of Staxy stuff, some hate pieces, interaction, counter spells. So first combo is going to be Isochron Scepter, Dramatic Reversal. So if you don't know this combo, you probably ought to. Isochron Scepter, you play it. Once it resolves, you can imprint a card from your hand onto the scepter. We can put a card draw spell on it and turn it into like a little value engine, and there's no problem doing that. We have bounce spells, so we can use this as a value engine early. And then when we're ready to win the game, we can just bounce it back to our hand or copy it or whatever. We've got Sculpting Steel that we could copy it with, and we've got Phyrexian Metamorph that we copy it with. I digress. The actual combo. We're going to get, with Isochron Scepter, we need Dramatic Reversal. Where'd it go? Right here. So, Isochron Scepter imprinting Dramatic Reversal means that you can tap 2 mana to put a copy of Dramatic Reversal on the stack. When you do, it untaps all of your non-land permanents. Importantly, that includes the Dramatic Reversal Scepter. So the scepter that has the Dramatic Reversal gets untapped along with everything else. So as long as you have 3 artifacts in play with Urza, because remember, all your artifacts tap for mana, or let's just say you have a Basalt Monolith. Say you have a Basalt Monolith in play, you can do the infinite combo just with that alone. So you can just tap 3 mana with Basalt. So tap the Basalt Monolith for 3 mana. Use 2 of it to activate Isochron Scepter. It untaps all your things, including the Basalt Monolith and the Isochron Scepter. Use 2 mana to tap it and do it again, and you're making infinite mana. So basically, you just need 3 mana's worth of artifacts in play, and Isochron Scepter, Dramatic Reversal, and you go infinite mana. And with this deck, if you go infinite mana, you win the game. You don't need an actual hard win con, which again we're going to get to shortly. Maybe the second one we'll talk about, Forensic Gadgeteer. So now this one doesn't work with all the artifacts, but this is a very good little value piece on its own, and it combos with exactly Basalt Monolith, but only specifically Basalt Monolith. So there's going to be 2 cards that'll combo exactly with Basalt. It's Rings of Brighthearth or Forensic Gadgeteer. And they both effectively do the same thing. So Forensic Gadgeteer reduces the activation cost to retap or to untap Basalt Monolith by 1. So it makes the untap 2. So that means that Basalt Monolith says tap to add 3 mana, untap it for 2 mana. Tap to add 3 mana, untap it for 2 mana, and you're floating 1 mana during every iteration of that. That's the same thing that Rings of Brighthearth is effectively going to say. With Rings of Brighthearth, you can copy the untap trigger. You can copy, it's not a mana ability. We're talking about the untap, the bottom ability, pay 3, untap Basalt. You're going to, if you have 2 mana floating in reserve, you're going to have 2 islands out, Basalt Monolith, Rings of Brighthearth, you're there. You can tap Basalt Monolith for 3, pay 2, using Rings of Brighthearth's ability, pay 2 to copy an ability. The ability you're going to copy is the untap ability that you're untapping Basalt Monolith with. So you're tapping the Basalt for 3 mana. You're going to use that 3 mana to untap the Basalt Monolith. You're going to use 2 mana to copy the untap trigger. When you do, you're going to tap the Basalt Monolith in response, but there's still going to be an untap trigger, which is effectively going to make it cost 2 mana for every time you untap the Basalt Monolith. So you're copying untaps for 2 mana, and you're using the Basalt Monolith to pay for the 2 mana to copy the untap. So again, just think of it like it's basically a cost reducer, the same way that Forensic Gadgeteer is. You do need 2 extra mana to start the little chain up with. But effectively, these 2 cards and 2 mana, infinite mana. And effectively, infinite mana, you win the game. What else? Hullbreaker Horror is probably the most convoluted, complex way. But man, this card is so good. 7 mana, it's a lot, but you cast it at flash and it can't be countered, so you don't have to worry about getting blown out for your 7 mana investment. You don't have to tap out on your turn and go shields down. You can wait until the last second, leave up mana for interaction, flash this guy in. You don't have to worry about somebody paying 2 mana to blow you out because you can't counter. It can't be countered. Once it's in play, it just raises hell. So you've got cantrips, you've got counter spells, you've got instants, you've got tutors. You're going to be casting a lot of spells in this deck. But, well, hell, you've got a bunch of 0-cost artifacts, right? You're going to be casting a bunch of stuff. So every time you cast a thing, you get to bounce a thing. So let's say somebody casts, let's say they pay 7 mana for a Peer into the Abyss. Looks like they're going to win. Well, you cast Brainstorm for 1 blue mana, and you use the first ability, return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand. So that kind of what it does is counters the spell, but puts it back in their hand. That's the way to think about it. So maybe they blew a bunch of resources getting that 7 mana Peer into the Abyss. Now it's back in their hand, but it's like, you know, good luck casting it again. And next time you're just going to do it again anyway, right? So this really takes over the game. This is a very, very good piece. Even though we can't very easily tutor for it, I still think it's well worth the include in the deck. It's the second ability that's really the one we're super into here. It's the second ability that wins the game for us. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So whenever you cast a spell, you can return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Now, let's go and look at some of our non-land permanents. We've got all these 0 and 1-drop artifacts. We've got Soul Ring is mana positive with... basically, you need mana positive rocks, right? That's what you need to make this thing work. So in Urza, like, you've got a ton of mana positive rocks. Welding Jar becomes a mana positive rock. So let's just say you've got a Welding Jar in play. You've got your Hullbreaker Horror out. So Hullbreaker Horror's out. Welding Jar is on the table, untapped, and you have a Mishra's Bauble in hand. What you're going to do, you're going to tap Welding Jar for 1 blue mana. Then you're going to cast Mishra's Bauble for 0. You're going to use the second ability. So whenever you cast a spell, like Mishra's Bauble, you're going to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So the permanent we're targeting is going to be Welding Jar. So now Welding Jar is in our hand, and Mishra's Bauble is in play. We're going to tap the Mishra's Bauble for 1 blue mana, and then we're going to cast Welding Jar. When we cast Welding Jar, we're going to use the Hullbreaker Horror to bounce the Mishra's Bauble. And we're going up 1 blue mana every time we do this. And we can just do that infinitely. So congratulations, that's infinite mana, you win the game. You even without having, even if you don't have your Urza in play, you can make infinite mana with like Soul Ring and Welding Jar. right? Or even you can put Basalt Monolith in because it taps for 3 and so if you have 1 mana positive rock and 1 mana neutral rock, you'll get there too. So you need 2 mana positives or 1 mana neutral and 1 mana positive. I think that's right. So Basalt Monolith, you tap for 3 mana. You play pay one of the mana to play your Soul Ring, tap it. You do the same dance, but the Basalt costs 3 and makes 3, but the Soul Ring costs 1 and makes 2. So you'll go up 1 colorless mana every iteration that way. Okay, so those are some of our ways to make infinite mana. And this is a complicated deck, no bones about it. But the most complicated part is going to be how to win once we actually have our infinite mana. That's where the game changes. That's where things get a little bit convoluted. So the nice thing is that it's totally free, right? You don't have to play any dead cards in order to win the game at the expense of just having to kind of memorize some win lines. Some of them are pretty easy. Some of them are kind of not so easy. So I'm going to go over the easiest one first. Remember, once you have access to infinite mana with Urza, you can exile your entire deck. You have access to your entire deck, and you can play those cards in any order you want. So if I'm giving you a list of like 3 cards in a specific order, and it seems like that's, Christmas land, it's not, because you definitely can get there. You exile your entire deck, you're there. You can play them, you have them all. It's just like you've got this screen open, you can pick the cards you want, play the cards you want in the order you'd want to play them. So first one is going to be kind of no matter how we went infinite. The simplest way to win, we play the Isochron Scepter with the Dramatic Reversal, and we play Codex Shredder. That's it. You just win the game. Tap the Isochron and the Codex, mill a person, it untaps, both of them untap. Tap them, untap them, tap them, untap them. Every time you tap the Codex Shredder, one opponent puts a card off the top of their library into the graveyard, and you just do that infinitely. Mill everybody out, pass turn, good game. Then the Winds of Rebuke thing is a little bit more complicated. We'll come back to that. What else? Probably the second least complex thing is going to be Capsize. So Capsize is just generally a pretty good card inside this deck. You're bouncing things and recasting them and getting all kinds of value that way. You're bouncing your opponent's things, slowing them down, buying this back. So you've like always got it. But if you have Capsize with infinite mana, you can bounce all of your opponent's permanents. You're going to cast Narset first, then you're going to bounce all their things. Then you're going to cast Windfall. So they draw all their permanents, and then they have to flush them all away. They get to draw 1 card, because Narset lets you draw 1 card per turn. But we can even be a little bit more mean than that. I guess we're going to have to get into this damn clock. Okay, so if you have a bounce effect, and you do because you've got your deck in your hand, or you have access to your whole deck, you've got Midnight Clock, infinite mana, and a way to bounce the Midnight Clock. What you're going to do is you're going to put 11 counters on it. When you put the 12th counter on it, it's going to do the thing. It's going to cause you to shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library and draw 7 new cards. But as soon as you put the 12th counter on it, remember you have infinite mana, you can put as many counters on as you want. When you put the 12th counter on it, in response to its ability going on the stack, you're going to use Capsize to bounce Midnight Clock back into your hand. So you're going to do the Time Twister thing, but you're going to keep the Midnight Clock in your hand. You can do the same thing with Hullbreaker Horror. You're going to put your Midnight Clock, draw 7 Twister effect on the stack. Usually it would go into the graveyard, but you're going to bounce it in response. So you have the Midnight Clock in your hand, and you've done a Time Twister. So we can do Twister loops this way. But what I was getting at is when we're going through this slightly easier thing where we're going to use Capsize to return Urza to our hand, return Urza to the battlefield, make a Karnstruck. So we're going to Capsize Urza, replay him. Capsize Urza, replay him. Capsize Urza, replay him. We're going to bounce all of our opponent's permanents. We're going to play Narset. We're going to play a wheel, our Windfall. They're going to discard most of their things. They'll still have one card left, though. We're going to use our midnight clock loop to get access to our wheel again. We're going to cast our wheel again, but this time Narset says they've already drawn one card, so now they're totally hellbent. So the end state of that, you make an infinite army, and your opponents have literally no board state, and they have no cards in their hand. So there's tons of ways to do this. I mean, you just have to kind of... It depends on if certain pieces have been exiled, you might have to go to this plan, but we don't need to play like, I don't know, like an A plus B combo. Like, if we're in a counterspell war and somebody's trying to win the game, or if we're trying to win the game, we don't want to have like Thassa's Oracle in our hand. And so a lot of players that play infinite mana Urza will put like a Laboratory Maniac or Lab Jace or Thassa's Oracle in their deck. It's totally redundant. There's absolutely no reason to do that at all. You just don't need it. You don't need it whatsoever. You can find a way. If you have infinite mana, access to your entire deck, you've built it with a little, like I said, foresight, then you just win the game. It's just about how you want to go about winning the game. So again, my go-to is going to be Isochron Scepter, Codex Shredder, win game. It's the easiest thing to explain. The most fun for me, the thing I think is the coolest, is just bounce all of their things with capsize. All of the things. Play your Narset, and then cast a wheel, your Windfall, and they'll probably scoop right there. And if they are like, well, no, I want you to play it out, then you'd be like, okay, hold on. Now I'm going to play the Midnight Clock. Then I'm going to Twister with Narset out. And all of their stuff goes bye-bye. And then you make your infinite army, and good luck to them. And you still have infinite mana. You can still Twister loop. You can still sculpt a perfect hand of whatever cards you want. So that's the kind of, I don't know if I want to say basic idea behind the deck, but that's the, I think, most efficient way to build the deck, roughly speaking. Again, there's lots of different ways you could build the deck. I'll say this is one efficient way you could build the deck. If I were going to play a $100 budget tournament tomorrow, and I had to play mono blue, this is the 100 cards that I would register for that event. So I guess that's going to do it for this video. And then we're going to go, next video is going to be just going through hands. And this is like the Selvala or Marwyn, where it's pretty freaking complicated, right? But once you start recognizing certain patterns, you're going to get it. And the deck is just kind of generically powerful enough. You're going to get enough wins just off the back of how busted Urza is. And I would say off the back of my build, you're going to win enough games where it's going to keep you involved and interested while you're figuring it out. It is complicated. But it's only complicated, really, when you're winning. So it's like, that's a good problem to have, right? So I think we've talked a bit about the strategy behind the deck and the win lines, how we make infinite mana, how we use infinite mana, why we pick Urza. I think that covers our bases. I'm kind of interested to get into some starting hands, but I don't want to make the video go too long. Yeah, so until next time, guys, may all your hands be good ones and all your outs be live, and live long and prosper long. May the force be with you and all the girls you've loved before. Until next time, live long and prosper, and namaste, my homies.